Well, imagine waking up at like 2 in the morning and you are just incredibly thirsty.
Oh, right, the classic middle of the night water run. We've all been there.
Exactly. So you swing your legs out of bed, your feet hit the floorboards, and you just start walking to the kitchen in the pitch black.
Because, I mean, you don't even bother with the
You
lights.
don't. You've lived there for years, right?
Uh,
So you reach out to touch the hallway wall you've touched 1,000 times
Okay.
before, and your hand just keeps going.
oh, wow. That is a terrifying thought.
Right. There is no wall. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a case file on a house that didn't just become haunted, it actually started physically rearranging its own geometry.
Yeah, to trap the person living inside.
Exactly. We're looking at a harrowing first-hand account of a supernatural intrusion. And the greatest threat here isn't, a monster under the bed.
Far from it.
It's the shifting predatory architecture of your own home. And ultimately, it's the reflection staring back at you in the mirror.
What we have in our source material today is just a meticulously detailed chronological log. It's fascinating.
It really is.
It reads less like a traditional ghost story meant to jump scare you, and much more like the field notes of a highly skeptical investigator, someone who is slowly realizing they are trapped inside a spatial anomaly.
A spatial and personal replacement.
Mhm.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly get why this log is so terrifying, we have to talk about the psychology of the home.
We really do. We take it for granted, but the home is fundamentally our baseline for reality.
It's our safe zone.
Right. In psychology, we refer to this as the concept of the sanctuary. Your home is supposed to be the ultimate extension of your personal autonomy.
I mean, out in the world, you're subject to the chaos of other people, the weather, traffic.
Exactly. But inside your house, you dictate the terms. You lock the doors to keep the threat out. You control the ambient temperature. You decide where the furniture goes. You control the lighting. It is a highly engineered safe zone. Right. And when that control is subverted, and not by an intruder picking a lock, but by the physical geometry of the house itself turning against you, it bypasses our normal defense mechanisms.
It triggers a primal, inescapable dread. It's an inside job. But the inside is the drywall, the studs, the floorboards.
Yeah, the literal building blocks of your reality.
To understand how a person loses their identity and their actual sense of self in this source, we first have to look at how they lose their environment.
Which is a gradual, insidious process.
The narrator of our source has lived in this same house for 3 years. I want to talk about what that means for the human brain.
3 years is a long time to map a space.
It is. I've lived in my current apartment for 5 years. Last week, I moved my coffee table about 2 inches to the left, and I bruised my shin on it 3 nights in a row.
Oh, absolutely. Our brains are hardwired to autopilot our environments.
So what's actually happening in the brain there?
Well, you were talking about spatial mapping. In neuroscience, there are specific neurons in your hippocampus called place cells and grid cells.
Place cells and grid cells. Okay.
Right, so when you live somewhere for 3 years, your brain literally builds an internal, subconscious, three-dimensional coordinate system of that space.
So you aren't actively thinking about walking down the hall.
Not at all. You don't think about navigating your house. Your muscle memory just executes the program.
So if a wall moved a foot to the left, my brain would just completely crash.
It would completely fail to process it, yeah.
And that is exactly what initiates this nightmare. The trigger for this spatial rewrite is the sudden appearance of a door.
Just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. It's described as a blank, handleless wooden door that manifests in a continuous wall between the bedroom and the bathroom.
Just spliced right into the architecture.
Right. Now, the narrator's first instinct here is brilliant, because they don't immediately scream that they have a ghost.
No, they act like a rational skeptic.
Their first instinct is intense self-doubt. They assume their own brain is failing. They wonder, did I just ignore this door for 3 years? Have I had a cognitive blind spot this whole time?
Which is such a deeply human protective response.
Is this?
Oh, yeah. When faced with the impossible, our brains will tie themselves in knots trying to construct a mundane explanation.
We'd rather think we're crazy than think the house is broken.
Exactly. We would much rather believe that our own memory is flawed or that we are experiencing a minor neurological glitch than accept the alternative.
Which is that the physical universe is actively breaking its own fundamental laws.
Right. That's way too much to process.
But the narrator puts on that skeptical investigator hat. They don't just sit there and question their sanity. They grab a tape measure.
I love that detail. They want empirical data to verify the hallway's dimensions.
They want hard proof. And the measurement confirms that the distance between the bedroom and the bathroom had actually increased.
The floor plan of the house has literally changed.
The sheer mechanics of that expansion are terrifying to consider. To accommodate the physical width of this new door, the house had to forcefully push the adjacent rooms apart.
It isn't an optical illusion. The hallway physically elongated.
We are seeing the house act as a predator here.
What's fascinating here is that the house is no longer a static, predictable structure built of dead, inert materials.
No, it's an active participant.
Exactly. It's shifting its own spatial reality to box in the protagonist. The container you live inside is altering its shape to consume you.
Let's talk about the physical properties of this door, because it gets so much weirder than just structural expansion.
Oh, the sensory details are incredible.
Right. The narrator tries to push against the wood, and it yields zero movement. It isn't just a heavy door stuck in a frame.
The text says it is as immovable as the concrete foundation itself.
Yeah, and then there's the sensory data. The narrator touches the wood, and the text specifically notes that the door is drawing heat away from your hand faster than the surrounding walls.
Which is a huge red flag.
I have a hard time wrapping my head around the physics here, because wood is notoriously a poor conductor of heat. Right?
It's an insulator, yes.
Right, so why would the source include this incredibly specific, contradictory detail about wood drawing heat away so rapidly?
Well, that contradiction is the exact detail that elevates this from a spooky story to a documentation of an anomaly.
Okay, tell me more.
You are entirely correct about the physics of wood. It should not draw heat away quickly like metal or glass would.
It just doesn't make sense.
The fact that it does defies the laws of thermodynamics. It tells the investigator that this isn't cold wood. This door is a localized thermal void.
Wait, explain how a thermal void works in this context. Like, what does that mean?
Instead of the wood itself being cold, imagine the door as a porous threshold to a dead space.
A dead space.
Yeah. It isn't just lacking heat. It is actively pulling the kinetic energy, the warmth of the living environment, out of the hallway and into whatever sits on the other side.
Oh, wow.
The extreme cold on the surface of the door is merely a symptom of a massive energetic vacuum behind it. It is siphoning the thermal energy of the home.
It's acting like a black hole for temperature. That is wild.
It really is.
But that spatial manipulation and that thermal drain that is really only the setup, once the physical boundaries of reality are bent to make room for this door, the entity within that space begins its active invasion.
The setup is complete and the trap is set.
Exactly. This brings us to the events of the very first night and the absolute acceleration of the anomaly. The source pinpoints an exact time when the rules of the house completely fall apart.
It's a very specific time, too, 2:10 a.m.
At exactly 2:110 a.m., every single light in the house fails simultaneously, and the atmosphere instantly shifts.
The air in the hallway becomes incredibly heavy and pressurized.
Let's look at why the source specifically flags 2:08 a.m. This isn't just a random spooky hour, right?
Not at all. If you look at human circadian rhythms, the window between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. is typically when our core body temperature drops to its absolute lowest point.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It is also the peak of deep REM sleep, which means our cognitive defenses and our physical mobility are completely shut off.
So we are literally at our weakest.
Exactly. The entity isn't just picking a time at random. It is targeting the exact biological window when its victim is most vulnerable.
It's waiting for the biological firewall to drop. And in that vulnerable state, in the pitch black, the air pressure spikes. It feels like being at the bottom of a swimming pool.
The pressure pushes in on the narrator's eardrums and chest. It's suffocating.
So what does that mean physically?
Well, when air becomes pressurized in a sealed, closed environment like a hallway, it means one of two things in physics.
Okay.
Either the physical volume of the space is rapidly decreasing, or a massive amount of new matter is being introduced into the space, displacing the oxygen.
So the house is literally closing in. And in that pressurized dark, the narrator realizes the immovable door, the one that felt welded to the foundation, has moved.
It's no longer a solid wall.
It is standing a few inches open. And again, they look for empirical proof. They shine a flashlight down and find a clean, sweeping arc recorded in the dust on the floorboard.
That detail is so grounded.
It proves that kinetic energy was expended in a house where no one else lives. The sweeping arc tracks a path, demonstrating that the door swung inward toward the bedroom.
The dust arc is an incredible piece of grounded evidence in a supernatural scenario. It confirms the aggressive geometry of the house.
The threshold has been breached from the outside in.
Exactly.
But the most chilling detail from this moment is how the narrator describes looking into that open crack. The text says, the darkness inside the doorway has a physical weight.
A physical weight.
Yeah, it sits in the gap like a solid object.
That phrasing completely subverts human evolutionary psychology regarding the dark.
Because we usually fear what's hiding in the dark,
Yeah.
not the dark itself.
Precisely. We fear the absence of light because it obscures the predator. We are afraid of the lion hiding in the shadows.
Right.
But here, the darkness is not an absence of light. The darkness is the intruding mass itself. It has physical weight. It is solid.
It's a thing.
Yeah. And going back to the air pressure spike we discussed, this explains the displacement. The heavy, pressurized air implies that this solid void is crowding the original occupant out of their own reality.
It's pushing them out.
Yeah.
And out of that heavy, solid darkness comes the mimic's first move. A voice speaks from the void.
A soft whisper asking the narrator to open the door fully.
But the voice speaking from the dark is a perfect, flawless replica of the narrator's own voice. Hearing your own voice originating from an empty space outside your own body would cause absolute paralysis.
Oh, it induces a severe state of cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance occurs when your brain tries to hold two contradictory truths at the exact same time. The brain knows I'm sitting here, my mouth is closed. But the ears are reporting I'm speaking over there in the dark.
I mean, I hate hearing my own voice on a recording.
Yeah.
It always sounds alien to me. But this is worse, because it sounds exactly like the internal voice you hear in your own head.
That touches on a fascinating biological mechanism, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you speak, you hear your voice through two channels. Air conduction, which is the sound traveling out of your mouth and into your ears, and bone conduction, which is the internal vibration of your skull and vocal cords.
Okay, so that's why we sound different to ourselves.
Exactly. Recordings only capture air conduction, which is why they sound flat to us. For this entity's voice to sound perfectly identical to the narrator's internal perception, it implies the entity isn't just mimicking external sound waves.
It's deeper than that.
It has somehow downloaded the narrator's internal biological sensory experience.
It knows what it feels like inside their skull. The voice in the dark stops whispering, and then slow, measured footsteps walk right up to the threshold, stopping just outside the bedroom door to knock 3 times.
A physical demand for entry?
Right. But a door cracked open is just an invitation. The entity can knock, it can whisper in the narrator's voice, but it seems to require the resident's active participation to proceed.
It needs them to interact.
Because by the next morning, the house takes a massive evolutionary leap to force the protagonist to interact.
The blank, featureless wood from the first day has mutated.
Mutated how?
Well, by morning, the house has generated a small, cold metal handle on the door. Form follows function.
Okay.
The house isn't randomly generating architectural anomalies like a glitching computer. It is displaying a terrifying predatory intelligence. It is adapting its physical structure specifically to be manipulated by a human hand.
It built a user interface.
It built a user interface designed exclusively to bait the resident. It needs the human element to operate the mechanics of the threshold.
Which brings us to the decaying mirror reality. The next time the clock strikes 2:1 a.m., the narrator is no longer cowering in bed.
They're up.
They wake up standing at the door, their hand already tightly gripping that newly formed metal handle. They're in a total fugue state, with zero memory of throwing off the covers or walking across the bedroom.
The entity is exerting a localized gravitational pull on their consciousness. It's a form of somnambulism, but induced by an external predator rather than internal brain chemistry.
Looking through the doorframe, they don't see that heavy, solid, dark void anymore. They see a corridor.
A very specific corridor.
It is a direct carbon copy window into their own house, but in a state of advanced decay. It is an older, rotting version of their reality.
The wallpaper is peeling, the wood is splintered.
It's a mirrored reality suffering from extreme entropy. At the end of that rotting hallway, a figure is standing in the gloom, perfectly still.
Just watching.
And as the narrator nervously grips the handle on their side, the figure slowly raises its arm and mirrors the exact grip on the handle on its side of the door.
This sequence is a masterclass in psychological horror because it introduces a terrifying mechanical implication.
Here is where I really look at this through the lens of modern technology.
Okay, I like that angle.
Every single time the narrator turns the handle to check the lock or jiggles the latch in panic, the figure on the other side repeats the physical motion perfectly.
The text states it is following the mechanics of the latch.
Exactly. Think about a piece of computer malware, specifically a keylogger.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
A keylogger hides in your system and silently monitors every single key streak you make to learn your password.
Right, it waits for you to type it in.
By struggling to keep this door closed, by physically manipulating the lock to make sure it holds, the narrator is unwittingly giving this entity a masterclass on how to operate physical human architecture.
That analogy perfectly captures the dynamic. The entity exists outside our physical laws. It doesn't inherently know how a spring-loaded latch functions or how a rotational torque opens a door.
It's learning on the fly.
It needs the narrator to provide the mechanical tutorial. Every struggle is a demonstration. They are literally typing in the password to their own reality, teaching the invader how to breach the threshold from the other side.
The survival instinct is being entirely weaponized. The very act of trying to secure the perimeter is what provides the enemy with the key.
It's incredibly cruel.
And this nightly forced tutorial at 2:20 scene AM takes a massive psychological toll. The trauma begins to bleed into the waking hours, utterly destroying the line between the nightmare of the anomaly and the safety of daylight.
Because waking up no longer offers any relief. The invasion of the inner sanctum is fully underway.
The source describes waking up in the morning. The bedroom door is locked. The morning sun is pouring in. The lights are on. But there is a heavy, crushing pressure in the chest.
The immediate residual panic of a nightmare.
The rational brain desperately tries to build a protective wall around that terror. The protagonist tells themselves, I was just sleepwalking. It was a vivid night terror, and I was just sleepwalking to the bathroom.
The logic tries to reassert the baseline mental map, but the physical evidence completely destroys the rationalization.
You feel your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lingering, unnatural, burning cold deep in the skin of your palm.
That thermal void we talked about earlier.
Yeah. The chill has transferred to the flesh. It's undeniable physical proof that you weren't just walking in your sleep, touching regular drywall. You were gripping something that fundamentally does not belong in the physical universe.
The cold is an artifact of the impossible space, and it has attached itself to the host.
When the narrator checks the hallway in the morning light, the door is completely gone. It has been replaced by the familiar, blank, continuous wall.
The mental map is seemingly restored.
But the ambient silence in the house has fundamentally changed. The text describes the silence as feeling heavy and expectant, as if the house itself is holding its breath.
The architecture is waiting for the next cycle. It is digesting the mechanical knowledge it extracted the night before.
This brings us back to the witching hour of this specific anomaly, 2:17 a.m. The hallway changes again.
It always comes back.
The door reappears, but this time it brings a shadow. A long, impossibly thin shadow stretches out from beneath the gap in the door, sliding across the floorboards with a deliberate physical weight until it stops dead right outside the bedroom door.
The entity has mapped the latch, it has breached the lock, and it has reached the physical boundary of the inner sanctum.
And then comes the command. The voice speaks through the wood. It carries the exact inflection, the exact pitch, the exact emotional resonance of the narrator.
The perfect imitation.
And it issues two words. Don't move.
We need to analyze the profound psychological shift happening right here.
Let's do it.
Up until this specific moment, the threat could still be loosely categorized as an external force trying to get in, like a wolf at the door.
Something outside of you.
Right. But when the voice speaking, the threat sounds exactly like the victim, and it actively issues a command to control the victim's physical body, don't move, the boundary between self and invader begins to dissolve.
Is blurring the lines.
The entity isn't just mimicking ambient sound anymore to scare the resident. It is assuming authority over the protagonist's actions. It is acting as the dominant, controlling version of the self.
It's commanding obedience from its own template. But the absolute peak of this evidence-gathering phase, the ultimate proof that the protagonist is actively losing this battle, happens the very next morning.
Yes.
It involves the digital footprint.
The photograph.
Yes, the photograph. Morning brings that deceptive, warm sense of normalcy. The sun is up. The hallway is just a normal hallway.
The rational brain tries one last time to say, oh, the fear is fading.
It was an auditory hallucination. It's over. Then the protagonist checks their phone. There is a single photo sitting in the phone's camera roll. It was time-stamped at exactly 2:17 a.m., taken by an unknown hand.
The investigative mind has to immediately ask a technical question here. How did an ethereal shadow entity manipulate a modern smartphone camera?
Exactly. I was wondering the same thing. Because you think about how modern capacitive touch screens work. They don't respond to dead weight or simple physical pressure.
Yeah, you can't just poke them with a stick.
Right. They require an electrical conductor like the bioelectricity in a living human finger to complete the circuit and trigger the shutter.
So it needs to be alive, essentially.
The phone was likely sitting on a nightstand. For the entity to cross the room, pick up the device, frame a shot, and successfully press the digital shutter, it implies the entity has rapidly developed physical mass and an electrical charge.
It has manifested a physical body within the home.
It has transitioned from a localized void into a physical conductor, and the content of that photograph proves it.
The visual evidence is just undeniable.
The framing of the photo is pure nightmare fuel. It shows the narrator standing in the hallway in the dark, staring blankly at the wall where the impossible door usually appears.
They are in that fugue state.
But they are not alone in the frame. Standing directly behind them, positioned so incredibly close that its breath should have been moving the hair on the back of their neck, is a perfect physical duplicate.
Same height, same build, same clothing.
But the facial expression betrays the mimicry.
It always does.
The text points out a highly disturbing detail about the duplicate's face in the photo. It has a smile that is caught in a horrific transition. It is stretched too wide for the human skull, and the camera caught it moving too slowly to be a natural human reflex.
It's an artificial expression.
When we smile a real, genuine smile, a Duchenne smile, the zygomatic major muscle in the cheek and the orbicularis oculi muscle around the eye contract simultaneously, almost instantly.
It's an involuntary reflex. We don't even think about it.
But this duplicate is manually operating the muscles of a face it doesn't understand.
It is the uncanny valley captured in high definition.
The uncanny valley, right?
The uncanny valley is a concept in aesthetics and robotics, but its roots are in evolutionary biology. When we see something that looks almost exactly human, but its movements or proportions are slightly off, like a slow, overly wide smile, our brain doesn't process it as a weird human.
It sees it as a threat.
The amygdala processes it as a pathogen, a corpse, or a predator wearing human skin. It triggers instant revulsion to force us to run away and avoid infection or death.
And seeing that revulsion immortalized in a digital photograph shatters any remaining desperate hope that this is a hallucination or a sleepwalking phase.
You cannot hallucinate a digital photograph with a timestamp.
The entity has moved past observation. It has breached the physical space. It has stood intimately close to the narrator, and it has left a permanent digital artifact.
It is actively documenting its own progress in the physical world.
When you are faced with that level of undeniable hard proof, when you realize you are being hunted in your own home by your own reflection, cornered animals eventually stop running.
They do. They realize there's nowhere left to retreat.
The sanctuary has been entirely compromised, so the only option is to turn and face the predator. The protagonist decides to flip the script. They decide they're done being the one who's paralyzed in bed, waiting to be photographed in the dark.
No taking control back.
The next night, they do not wait in the bedroom. They stand in the hallway, wide awake, facing the blank wall where the anomaly occurs, waiting for 2:12 a.m.
This is the moment of confrontation. They are attempting to reclaim their territory.
The manifestation happens right in front of their eyes. It's described like watching a 3D mirror assemble itself out of raw matter. The plaster of the wall begins to ripple.
The physical architecture is breaking down.
It physically gives way, transforming into the grain of dark wood. The door forms out of nothing, but this time it is upgraded. It has a heavy, solid brass handle.
Notice that material shift. It went from cold, simple metal to heavy brass.
What does that signify?
In architectural terms, brass implies permanence, durability, and a heavy anchor to the physical world. The entity is becoming more substantial. The invitation is becoming a permanent fixture of the home.
But here is the ultimate twist of spatial horror during this confrontation. The narrator reaches out for the brass handle, but the sound of heavy footsteps that accompany the manifestation. They aren't coming from the rotting hallway on the other side of the door.
The spatial map has inverted.
The footsteps are coming from the end of the real hallway, right behind the narrator's back. The entity isn't knocking to get in anymore. It is already inside.
The entity has fully crossed over.
The narrator slowly turns around, and they find themselves standing there. The duplicate is completely out of the frame of the door. It is occupying the real physical space of the home.
Face to face.
And at first glance, it is absolutely perfect. The same clothes, the same tired dark circles under the eyes, the exact same exhausted posture. It is a three-dimensional reflection standing in the hallway.
But the longer the narrator looks, the more that terrifying perfection starts to fracture.
They notice the chest of the duplicate. There is absolute dead stillness. There is no rise, no fall, no rhythm of respiration.
Because it doesn't need oxygen. It has assembled the biological hardware of a human body, but it doesn't require the biological processes to sustain it.
It is an image of life that doesn't need to breathe. The narrator, utterly terrified by this unbreathing copy, takes a step backward to put distance between them.
A natural reaction.
The copy matches the movement. It steps forward, but the timing is off.
This brings us back to the uncanny valley, but applied to temporal physics. The text describes a microsecond of lag in the movement, a delayed mimicry.
The narrator steps back, and a fraction of a second later, the entity steps forward. It's like watching a badly dubbed movie, but in real life.
That microsecond delay is the key to understanding the nature of this threat. It reveals that the entity is not autonomous.
It's not its own person.
It does not possess its own internal drive, intent, or sequence of actions. It is merely reacting to the data it is receiving. It is a hollow shell, an empty vessel that is desperately trying to download the narrator's physical timing in real time.
It's buffering.
Exactly. It needs the narrator's movement to know how to move. It needs the narrator's vocal cords to know how to speak.
And when it does speak, the conversation they have in the hallway is an incredibly aggressive form of supernatural gaslighting.
It is an attack on the protagonist's cognitive timeline.
When the duplicate speaks, the mouth doesn't move in sync with the sound at all. The voice seems to bleed out of the walls themselves, surrounding the narrator with a sound that is undeniably theirs, but completely detached from a physical throat.
Disembodied.
And the voice tells the protagonist to lie. It claims that the narrator was the one who opened the door first. It claims that this entire nightmare began solely because of the narrator's own curiosity. You invited me in. You did this.
It is attempting to rewrite the history of the event to establish dominance.
The narrator frantically searches their own mind for a rebuttal. They want to yell, "No, you appeared out of nowhere. You forced the wall open with a tape measure."
But they can't.
But when they search their memory of that very first night, they find a terrifying, gaping hole in their cognition, a blank spot. They can remember the intense fear. They can remember the unnatural burning cold of the wood. But the actual physical moment the door first opened, the moment the latch was turned, it is gone.
Yeah, they have absolutely no memory of the handle turning.
And that is how the shadow entity seizes total control of reality. It doesn't need to physically overpower the protagonist in a fistfight. It just needs to exploit the gaps in their hippocampus.
It hacks the memory center.
By using the narrator's own memory gap against them, it attempts to convince them that they are the architect of their own haunting.
It's trying to fill the void of the missing memory with its own aggressive narrative.
It is a profound surgical violation of self-trust.
If you cannot trust your own memory of events, you cannot defend yourself against a false narrative. The entity is eroding the psychological foundation of the protagonist's reality so that it can build its own existence on top of the ruins.
It is creating a timeline where the entity belongs in the house and the human is the aberration.
But the physical evidence holding the narrator's sanity together is still right in front of them.
Right. The narrator looks at the non-breathing chest. They watch the delayed, lagging movements. Their senses confirm that this thing is an imitation. It's a stalemate in the hallway. Neither one moves.
But as the text implies, it is a stalemate that heavily favors the invader. Time is on the side of the anomaly.
Because the entity doesn't need to win a fight. It doesn't need to strike a physical blow. It just needs time to practice, to close the gap in the lag, to synchronize the buffering. Which brings us to the final sequence of the log.
The total takeover.
We move to the next morning, and it's the most deceptive, devastating morning yet.
The mind craves a return to the baseline mental map, and the house briefly provides it.
The hallway is completely empty. There is no impossible door. The wall is continuous drywall, no brass handle, no duplicate standing in the shadows. The house is completely blissfully quiet.
It feels like it's over.
The text notes that if for a brief, desperate moment, the protagonist actually convinces themselves that they won, that standing their ground in the hallway the night before banished the thing back to its rotting dimension.
They feel a wave of immense relief.
So they go through the mundane autopilot motions of their morning routine. They walk into the bathroom. They stand before the bathroom mirror.
The bathroom mirror is the ultimate symbol of self-reflection and identity confirmation.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Psychologically, going back to Jacques Lacan's mirror stage, humans use reflections to verify their physical boundaries and consolidate their sense of I. We check our faces every single day to ensure we are who we think we are, and that our internal self matches our external projection.
They stand there at the sink, looking at the dark circles under their tired eyes. They watch their reflection follow every exhausted movement they make. brushing their teeth, running the cold water, washing their face.
The reflection is a perfect, flawless, instant mirror of their action.
And then the climax of the narrative.
The collapse of the boundary.
The narrator leans over the sink and looks directly, deeply into their own eyes in the glass, and they blink. But for a single, terrifying, impossible second, the reflection does not.
The entity has completed its migration.
The reflection stays wide-eyed. It stares back with an intense, calculating lucidity that the exhausted narrator is simply not feeling. It ceases to be a reflection in that exact moment. The text calls it something else entirely. It says, it is no longer a reflection, it is a witness.
That phrasing is incredibly precise.
Although,
A reflection mimics without intent. A witness observes with independent consciousness. The thing trapped behind the glass has gained autonomy, while the human standing in the room is losing theirs.
when the reflection finally does blink, a full second too late before the eyelids even open again, the face in the mirror changes. It spreads that same slow, unnatural, too wide, non-Duchenne smile from the digital photograph.
It is asserting dominance. It is showing the host that it is in control of the interface.
I want to pause and really ask you to imagine the physical revulsion of that moment. How horrifying it must feel to have your own facial muscles seemingly hijacked.
It would be nauseating.
You are staring at your own face in a piece of glass, and the glass is forcing you to see an expression, a sinister, threatening, predatory smile that you are absolutely not making with your physical body.
It's a complete severing of the link between human intention and physical reality.
You are trapped inside a meat suit, and someone else has the steering wheel.
It is the absolute death of autonomy. You have lost control of your environment, you have lost control of your memory, and now, finally, you have lost control of your own image.
And the source leaves us with this incredibly powerful closing metaphor to explain the mechanics of this creeping, inevitable takeover. It asks the reader to imagine two pulses.
The two pulses analogy perfectly encapsulates the entire terrifying timeline we've just tracked.
Let's break that analogy down. What exactly does the source mean by the two pulses?
Think of a heart monitor, or better yet, a pair of mechanical metronomes sitting on a table. Two distinct pulses that start out beating at completely different rhythms, totally out of phase.
Okay, I can picture that.
One pulse is the original human, the narrator. The other pulse is the shadow, the entity that crawled out of the decaying mirror reality, trying desperately to find the same frequency.
During those first few nights, the gap between the pulses is glaringly obvious.
Exactly. The shadow is slow, it's clunky, it's a microsecond late when stepping backward in the hallway. Its voice is completely detached from its physical throat.
It smiles too slowly because it doesn't understand muscle tension.
The mimicry is deeply flawed, existing entirely in the uncanny valley. But every single time the human moves, every time they check a lock or speak a word, the shadow adjusts its metronome.
It's constantly learning and updating its software.
Yes. The entire story, this whole harrowing log, has just been the documentation of the shadow adjusting its rhythm. Every day, every interaction, the gap between the original action and the duplicate's reaction got smaller and smaller and smaller.
The delay shrank from seconds to microseconds to milliseconds.
The reflection is catching up to the original.
And that is the ultimate horror of this specific type of replacement. It isn't a violent murder in the dark. It isn't a sudden, bloody abduction. It is the quiet, mathematical inevitability of a sinking metronome.
The shadow is synchronizing.
And the source makes it brutally, terrifyingly clear. Eventually, the lag will hit zero. You will blink, and there will be absolutely no delay at all. The pulses will overlap perfectly.
Perfect alignment.
And in that moment of perfect alignment, when the shadow moves with a zero lag, when the smile looks perfectly natural and reaches the eyes, there will be absolutely no way to tell which one of you is still breathing and which one is the imitation.
The original person, the original consciousness, will have been completely seamlessly overwritten by their own reflection, and the world will never notice the difference.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at a house that was just a few inches too big, a tape measure that showed a hallway expanding to fit an impossible door.
And we journeyed from a simple, terrifying architectural anomaly to the absolute, total erosion of personal autonomy and human identity.
It forces us to confront how incredibly fragile our perception of self truly is. We rely entirely on the physical world to fill, the fixed walls of our home, the predictable temperature of a door, the real-time reflection in a piece of glass to confirm that we exist.
And that we are who we think we are. When that physical world decides to betray us, when the architecture actively conspires to replace us, our entire identity simply collapses into the void.
It is a profoundly unsettling thought, and I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative idea to ponder before we wrap this up.
Oh, lay it on us.
We all have those minor everyday memory gaps, right? We all experience those deeply frustrating moments where you walk confidently into a room and you suddenly completely forget why you went in there.
Your mind just goes totally blank.
Or you misplace your car keys in a house that you know perfectly, a house you've mapped in your hippocampus for years. We always just laugh it off as being tired or being distracted or just getting a little forgetful.
It's just a normal human glitch.
But thinking about the two pulses, thinking about the shadow, constantly trying to sync up its rhythm with your own policy, what if those brief, mundane moments of blankness aren't just forgetfulness?
That's a terrifying question.
What if those tiny memory gaps are the exact moments your own shadow is quietly taking the wheel? What if those are the moments it is practicing its synchronization, waiting for the perfect day to match your pulse while you simply blink?
Wow.
The next time you check your reflection in the bathroom mirror to wipe the sleep from your eyes, pay very, very close attention to the timing, just to be sure it blinks when you do. Make sure it isn't just a witness. Until next time.